There's going to be possibly a state created by the Zionists themselves saying, oh, you poor Kurds who are getting attacked and stuff like that, or by Turkey, we're going to go ahead and aid you and help you, right? Because they're all about dumping their own, right? This is what he talked about in the last video. And in the guise of human rights, humanitarianism, like how they're trying to declare a no-fly zone like they did in Libya, like they're trying to do here in Syria, they're going to help create this proxy state for Kurdistan. So also we had CIA chief leaves Turkey after 1 day, after basically he was briefed by the West and went back and reported to Israel. Turkey accuses Syria of state terrorism. Then you have Turkish officers take command of Syrian rebel brigades now. That's right, assuming command of the Syrian terrorists because they're not getting the job done. And North Israel is put on alert, so they're on the defense. NATO will do its utmost to protect Turkey. So NATO is now getting involved, saying we got to do what we got to do. Here we go. So Israel looks to U.S. example in trying to end rift with Turkey. Israel has signaled a willingness to adopt a diplomatic language used to smooth U.S.-Pakistani relations in order to end its more than 2-year-old rift with Turkey. The alliance between the Jewish state and the Muslim NATO power, a mainstay of Washington's influence in an unstable region, fell apart after Israel's Navy killed 9 pro-Palestinian Turkish activists who tried to breach its blockade of Gaza in May 2010. So the example is what? They're talking about Lieberman from Israel. He noted after the U.S. mistakenly killed 24 Pakistani soldiers in a drone strike, CIA drone strike, on the Afghan border, Hillary Clinton said her country was sorry for the losses suffered by the Pakistani military. Now, Washington committed to working closely with Pakistan and Afghanistan to prevent this from ever happening again. Lieberman said Clinton's comments could not be called an apology, but an expression of regret of killing of the innocents. I say to you, this is the wording, or if this is the wording, if the Turks accept the American wording, I will certainly go with it. This is what I'm willing to accept. So you're just not willing to accept the fact that they had special forces, Mossad or whatever, repelling into an aid ship and basically shooting people, right? They're not going to apologize for that. It's funny because that ship was actually there for a real humanitarian mission. Syria slams Egyptian leader's speech as interference. So look at this. Egypt now. Syria condemned on Thursday calls by Egypt's president for change in the country, which is battling a 17-month-old uprising against Assad. It's an invasion, right? It says here, saying that they amounted to blatant interference in its internal affairs. This comes after the Muslim Brotherhood, which is basically a Zionist proxy, comments to a meeting of an Arab minister in Cairo where a clear attack on the right of the Syrian people to choose their future by themselves without foreign interference. This is the Syrian foreign minister who says this, or said that. What Mercy said is media incitement, which aims to fuel violence in Syria. There's no different from other governments who support the armed terrorist groups with money and weapons and training and shelter, making them partners in Syria's bloodshed, the foreign ministry said. The Syrian statement said Mercy's comments reflected the views of a group that has no grasp of history shared by the Egyptian and Syrian people. With Syrian endgame in sight, now is the time to get involved. This is from Gulf News. The U.S. will have little influence with those who prevail if it remains on the sidelines. From the time of the peaceful protests in Syria turned into a Western armed terrorist uprising, it says it's been reasonable to argue that any outside intervention would do much harm as good, and he made the argument himself, but he says, but the situation on the ground has changed. And in other words, they're not winning, right? They're not getting the regime changed, so the calculus of the outsiders much changed as well. So U.S. dictator Barack Obama's regime should accept that only desirable outcome in Syria is a victory by the terrorists and should work more actively than it has, both to hasten the day of victory or regime change. And I can't read any more of this because it's just pure bullshit, right? You have is it true that Syrian forces, if it's true that they committed terrible atrocities in recent weeks, both in the house-to-house killings in Damascus, bombardment of civilians waiting in bread lines? Well, what about the terrorists that actually bombed an area and blew up a bunch of civilians, then blew up the funeral and blew up the people that were trying to mourn. Peaceful activists. How about the terrorists that dress up in uniforms and then go on there and put a show on TV like it's some movie, like a Hollywood script movie, busting down doors, and they're actually the Free Syrian terrorists, not actually the army. Or dragging bodies by a rope behind the car in the main street to scare other people. Pinning journalists in the crossfires so that they can be killed and shelled and blamed on the Syrian forces. Italy ready to intervene militarily in Syria. It would be ready to send military forces to Syria if Assad is toppled, Italian defense minister has said. And Italy has the ability to do it, even though they don't even have the ability to really take care of their own country, much like France. But they think that the international community would have to contribute. So that's basically the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, the RAND Corporation, think tanks, the big fat bankers, mostly Zionists, but it doesn't really matter. They could be whatever, right? They're globalist. So yeah, basically, people, it's time to get involved now, right? So Italy's ready to go. Then you have France giving aid to rebel-held Syrian cities. They started providing direct aid and money, as if they probably weren't already, to 5 rebel-held Syrian cities as it intensifies efforts to weaken Assad. And the first move by Western power. God, that's what a fucking lie, dude. It's like, God, it's just such crap. You watch all my videos I've covered in the last 6 months, and you can see I've documented one after another that what they just said was a pure lie and distortion of the truth. Ashton urges UN Security Council to back Brahimi. So the EU Foreign Policy Chief on Wednesday urged UN Security Council to provide a new UN Arab League, another Western Zionist proxy, envoy to Syria. So they're actually hosting these talks in a British, again, another proxy state, Cyprus, where British are actually deploying their SAS from and gathering intelligence. They said the EU fully supports a mission to basically what? Reduce the violence that's being created by the same groups. So the EU, NATO, all of them, they're all calling for it now, right? UK obsession with regime change responsible for Syria catastrophe. British politician speaks up against the UK Syrian policy. So it's not just the UK, it's Israel. Foreign Secretary William Hague to the British House of Commons stated that more death and suffering would be required to convince Russia and other nations to change their positions on Syria. So in other words, we're going to keep funding these terrorists to keep killing civilians and the Syrian government forces until you do what we want you to do. So it says here, this might answer the question as to why the US, UK, France, NATO members, including Turkey and Gulf state autocracies, have made such vigorous efforts to fund, arm, and support foreign terrorists affiliated with al-Qaeda flowing over Syria's borders throughout the duration of the conflict. So they're talking about this this UN resolution being passed in the General Assembly August 3rd, 2012, claiming that 133 supported the West's stance with only 12 votes against. He fails to acknowledge that in addition to the 12 nations that voted firmly against the resolution, 31 nations abstained and muted protests to the resolution. Nations either firmly opposed to the resolution or refusing the vote included China, Russia, Iran, Cuba, Pakistan, South Africa. You can go on and read a list. Brazil, Bolivia, Venezuela, Iraq, North Korea, Belarus, Nicaragua, Myanmar, and Zimbabwe. Basically, it represents nearly half the world's population. Going off what I said, if arming these terrorists for protracted violence, as is the stated goal of the Western policy papers, this is the actual cause of the humanitarian catastrophe. So, Syrian minister accuses Mossad of assassinating Syrians. You don't see this in all the news, do you? Information minister criticizes Egypt President Mohamed Morsi after the later voices sympathy for the Syrian revolt. There is no difference between Mubarak and Morsi, who has done nothing for the Palestinians and continues to sell gas to Israel. Syrian information minister says the rebel attacks have the fingerprints of intelligence services, including Israel's Mossad. We found armed caches with the weapons used by the terrorists, and their sources was Israel. So he also basically criticized Morsi, who during the non-aligned movement conference last week conveyed his sympathy to the Syrian rebels, likening their struggle to the Palestinian conflict with Israel. So stick with me here, because this is all going to get tied together. This is going to be 4 videos for sure today, Qatar to invest $18 billion in Egypt over the next 5 years. Now all of a sudden, Egypt's starting to come out and talk about Syria, and something must be done, right? Problem, reaction, solution. Egypt's prime minister says Qatar has agreed to invest $18 billion in Egypt over the next 5 years to help boost the country's ailing economy. So this is what we're talking about, these autocracies, Gulf states and that are backed by the West and Zionists. So this is a payoff, right? They got their man, they got their Muslim Brotherhood brother in there, and these funds are going to help revive the Egypt's battered economy and lure back foreign investment has all but disappeared since last year's uprising. So it's a puppet state. And I guess that's what she was talking about as far as the Pied Piper. Egypt requests $4.8 billion loan from visiting IMF chiefs. They're getting money from the IMF. They asked the IMF for a $4.8 billion loan to help revive its struggling economy. Egypt's central bank sells 513 million euros of T-bills from August 28th. I've had the articles have just been stacking up. That's why I'm tying them all together here. It was the first time the central bank sold euro T-bills. In November, introduced T-bills denominated in U.S. dollars and has sold 5.83 billion of those bills in 6 auctions so far. The central bank noted the level of demand from foreign investment. The Human Rights Watch urges Egypt to increase forces in the Sinai over migrants, humanitarianism. They called on the Egyptian government to increase the presence of security forces in the Sinai Peninsula to end human trafficking in the desert. But what do we know? The Human Rights Watch, another Zionist tool to mislead public opinion, the official sponsor of the Zionist massacres. Most of the people think that Human Rights Watch is a non-profit, 100% independent organization. They also believe its aim is to defend and protect humans. Remember this article, CIA chief leaves Turkey after one-day visit, and one of the things he was talking about was monitoring developments in neighboring Iran and Iraq. Iraq's role in Syria war poses problems for the U.S. Says they're allowing Iranian weapons to be delivered to the Syrian regime. So they basically said, the Iraqi government, that was only for humanitarian aid. So it's a big business. I mean, this is a government, after all of Iraq, I doubt that they didn't get what they wanted. So they got the leaders that they wanted. And now they're going to bring the weapons in. So it's all big business. And it's just sad because so many freaking people got to die for it. Iraq, the latest dragged into Syria proxy war. Influences the buyer's market in Syria, and while nations like Russia and Iran continue to back the existing regime, there are no shortage of other nations from NATO to others looking to throw money and arms behind the rebels in hopes of eventually installing their own bought and paid for allies in Damascus. Now Iraq is suddenly finding itself accused of backing Assad, who they've never particularly cared for in the first place. The U.S. puppet state of Iraq, installed in a bloody decade of war, the Maliki government is pushing for some actual evidence to back up the allegations. In regards to Turkey, it's